The 70s is not just an era, it is a whole life that has remained in the heart of everyone who lived through those times. It was a world without internet and cell phones, where every moment was filled with simple joys that seemed eternal. In this video, we dive into memories that will awaken the warmest feelings and nostalgia. Moments when the whole world was big and friendly, and you could walk until evening without thinking about time. For many people who grew up in the 70s, these little things are already a big part of their soul. Take a walk through these memories with us, and maybe you too will remember something that will warm your heart and make you feel that very gone but so dear world again. Are you ready to feel that magic and nostalgia again? Outdoor games were always the most awaited time of the day. After school, the bicycle was waiting at the porch, and immediately, on the street where the whole company gathered. They rode around the neighborhood, raced to see who could get to all the houses the fastest, played ball in the middle of the road until a car approached. At sunset, everything turned into hide and seek, hiding behind bushes, garages, under neighbors' porches. The girls would sit on the steps and pull out their dolls. Each had their own family of Barbies to feed, tuck in, throw them parties. You could spend all day outside only to come home for dinner, hyped up with scraped knees and happy faces. Everything was real. Real friends, real dust on your hands, real joy. There was always someone's older brother standing by the yard with a radio or portable speaker, music playing in the background to each day. Sometimes someone would bring a jump rope or a rubber band and everyone would immediately get involved. Crayons on the pavement were everywhere, from classics to dog portraits to houses. Even just lying on the grass and looking up at the sky seemed to be an activity. Returning home was accompanied by the ringing of the porch bell as Mom called for dinner. The day would end with a feeling of complete, exhausted, but incredibly warm fatigue. The next day, it would be the same thing all over again. The moments when, after street games, we would all gather at someone's house with long conversations and giggles were not forgotten. Waiting for the evening show or just discussing a new episode of your favorite show. Everything was part of that life when every day was unique and time flew by. House parties with games where the one who was the best at hiding or solving riddles won. Returning to this world was a moment when it seemed like childhood would never end. All it took was a little time and good friends nearby. Laughing until we cried, discussing secrets, or just sitting back and enjoying the moment. There were so many such days filled with simple joys that would be enough for a lifetime. These moments stayed in my mind like golden memories. Memories of carefree days that didn't need to be searched for or planned. Everything happened by itself, from the simplest of things, but that was their magic. Vinyl records created an atmosphere that nothing else could replicate. My father had a record player, huge, wooden, with a lid that had to be carefully lifted. The records were in a drawer nearby. Led Zeppelin, Bee Gees, Simon and Garfunkel. On weekends, the crunch of the vinyl and the slight hissing sound before the song started would spread through the house. The whole family listened, sitting on the floor, some closing their eyes, some singing along. Sometimes I was allowed to put the needle in myself. The moment was almost sacred. The record collection was a source of pride. Each cover was a work of art. Each name was almost like a personal acquaintance. Some records were scratched, but even that sounded like part of the memory. Vinyl wasn't just a way to listen to music, it was a way to feel it. There were albums that were only listened to in the rain, and there were albums that were only listened to in the summer with the window open. Friends had collections at home too, and we often traded. Sometimes you could find a rarity at a flea market, and it was an event. Music in those years was not in the background, it was the main thing. It shaped moods, memories, and even friendships. Each record was unique, and even if you knew the album by heart, there was always the feeling of rediscovering it. These moments of listening became part of our daily reality, impossible to forget, because they were imprinted in the memory like fingerprints. Vinyl music, with its warmth and lively sound, stayed in the heart like a friendly conversation that never leaves. Television shows were almost a ritual. After dinner, the TV was turned on. A huge box on legs with a small screen and convex glass. Happy Days, The Brady Bunch, The Dukes of Hazzard. Every day of the week had its own program. The family had their favorite day, Saturday, when there was a cartoon block in the morning and a family show in the evening. Everyone sat down in the living room, on the couch, in the chairs, someone right on the carpet. Before it started, no one talked. Everyone waited for the splash screen. Sometimes the recorded laughter would come on, but even without it, we laughed heartily. TV united both parents and children. We discussed heroes afterwards, quoted phrases at school. Someone had a better antenna, and they would run there to watch a show they couldn't catch at home. Sometimes the TV jumped in frames, and we had to knock on the side panel. It worked. There were power outages, and that was a real tragedy. Everything on the screen felt real, almost alive. It wasn't just programs, it was part of family life. Cassette recorders used to bring real magic. The first tape recorder came into the house when I was a teenager, and it was an event. We would record songs from the radio, catch the moment, hit rec, and freeze. Sometimes the announcer would speak over the intro, and it would make me terribly angry. We'd make selections. For the road, for your sweetheart, for yourself. We'd rewind them with a pencil to save battery power. Whoever had a 2-cassette recorder was the king of the company. We copied each other's albums, drew the covers with our own hands. Some cassettes were squeaky, but it was impossible to throw them away. Bulky headphones gave the moment privacy. I took the tape recorder to the park, outdoors, even on trips to the lake. The sound was scratchy, but beloved. Music became something personal, something to touch, to leaf through, to keep. Sometimes the cassette would get jammed and I had to carefully pull it out, straighten the tape. It was a whole process and it made the music real, alive. Arcade games became a new level of fascination near the end of the 70s. Arcade halls flickered with lights, sounds came from every machine, and the smell of heated electronics and sweet sodas lingered in the air. Pong, Space Invaders, Asteroids. These names sounded like a challenge. Coins were saved up to spend as much time as possible at the screen, trying to break their own record. The queue to a popular machine could stretch for a long time, but no one complained. Nearby stood a similarly obsessed guy sharing advice, watching someone else's game like a sport. The screen flickered, fingers pressed buttons blindly, and the heart pounded as the last life was left. The arcade was where friendships and competition were born. There were always 2 or 3 quarters in my jeans pocket, just in case the path led past the arcade. The lights there were dimmed, time lost count. Sometimes the adults would come calling home, and it was always too early. Winning at Galaga or reaching the boss level was almost a matter of honor. Some automatons were true rarities, and were talked about like urban legends. Even just watching who played the best was fascinating. These halls were part of the city, part of growing up, part of the culture. Comic book stores were little oases of fantasy in everyday life. Walking in there was like crossing the line between reality and imagination. Inside smelled of paper and printing ink. The shelves were stacked with Marvel, DC, and Archie series. Often knew the salesmen and other regulars by name. Everyone was part of the same world. They'd come in for a new issue of Spider-Man, but leave with 2 more because they couldn't resist. We'd sit on the floor and read in the store before anyone kicked us out. We'd save money for comics from our lunches or collect bottles to give away. Sometimes we'd make a deal with a friend and get different series, then swap them. Some issues were hidden under the pillow. They were treasures. The covers were cut out and pasted on the wall like posters. There were rare issues that you wanted to get at any cost. When a new series came out, it was the talk of the school. Comics weren't just reading, they were dreaming. Each issue was like a little journey. These stores were the first libraries of fantasy available to everyone. They became the place where legends were created. Some collected complete Iron Man series, others became experts on Batman and his enemies. But everyone was interested in following heroes who became almost like friends. Even if they were fictional, for many, comic books were a source of inspiration because each character, whether it was Spider-Man, Superman, or the brave thief from Archie, was his own, with a unique story and experiences. Behind each character was a different morale, a different conflict, and that gave comics a special meaning. Collecting a collection became a personal process where each issue was valuable and unique. Some collectors monitored the condition of each book, putting them away in special plastic bags so as not to damage them. The comic book became not just an object to read, but a real artifact. It was a pleasure to come home with a new issue and keep it in perfect condition. as if it would become a legacy to be passed down through the generations. Evenings around the TV with family programs created a rare feeling of coziness and closeness. After dinner, the whole family would gather, sometimes bringing pillows on the floor or just sitting cuddled up on the couch. Shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, The Muppet Show, and The Carol Burnett Show were on the screen. These programs brought generations together. Adults laughed with the kids. No one was looking at their phones. There were none. Everyone lived in the moment. Dad's reaction to a joke, little brother's giggle, mom's look when a favorite song started. Sometimes popcorn was roasted or homemade cookies were brought in. When the show was over, no one was in a hurry to leave. Conversations continued, discussing, repeating skits. On those evenings, the house seemed especially warm. Some episodes were recorded on cassettes to watch later. There were traditions. We watched comedies on Fridays and family movies on Sundays. TV was not just a screen, but a hearth that brought everyone together. Even if they quarreled during the day, by evening, everything was forgotten over the next episode of their favorite show. Those hours were quieter, lighter, kinder. They remained in my memory as moments of serene happiness. Waiting for a new movie to come out in the theater was a real experience. To know that Star Wars or Jaws was coming out soon was to live in anticipation. Posters appeared in the windows, and every day one looked at the schedule. Tickets were bought in advance. The line to the box office stretched to the corner. The movie theater was a temple, a dark hall, loud sound, the smell of popcorn and soda. We sat holding our breath as the first frames flashed on the screen. The reaction of the hall was part of the experience. Everyone laughed, got scared, applauded together. After the movie, they couldn't leave for a long time. They discussed, argued, fantasized. Sometimes we watched the movie twice, because one time was not enough. Then we went to school as if it were a holiday, to retell who understood what. The first blockbusters left an imprint like a holiday. Every trip to the movies was like a mini adventure. There were days when we went as a family or a group from the yard. The auditorium was full of expectation, electricity, anticipation. Those moments are some of the most alive, vibrant, real. Star Wars has become iconic not only because of its fantastic story, but also because of those who have tried to recreate a piece of this universe in real life. Kids would go to the schoolyard and have battles on lightsabers, making them out of sticks and improvised materials. At the corner of the house became an Imperial spaceship, and instead of heroes dressed in costumes, walked around ordinary boys, representing themselves as Jedi and Darth Vader. There were even little fan clubs where rows of character figures were lined up, exchanged and memorized phrases from the movie. Jaws made everyone afraid of water. After the movie came out, kids would have a shark chase in rivers and lakes, who would scare their friend more by making up some creepy story. The fear of going into the water was real, especially if there were shark-like fins from toy sets somewhere nearby. Phrases like, "We can't do that," "We don't have boats big enough," quickly became quotes, and every summer you could hear someone on the beach repeating them. Equally iconic were movies such as The Naked Gun or Rambo. Parodies of these movies were especially popular. At school parties, someone was always impersonating action heroes, replaying scenes with cross-dressing or heroic poses. Sports practices turned into real mini-movies. The gym teacher often imitated some turns from Rambo, doing everything to make the children feel that they too could become heroes. In this way, the movies not only remained in memory through the screens, but also influenced the way everyday life was perceived, creating their own real-life epics right in children's yards and schools. The corded telephone was a portal to another world. It hung on the wall in the kitchen, with a long, twisted cord that could reach almost to the hallway. Conversations with friends could go on for hours, especially in the evenings after school. Sometimes parents overheard, sometimes we had to whisper if we were discussing secrets. When the phone rang, everything came to a standstill. We ran as fast as we could to pick up the phone. Whoever had a second phone in the room was a real adult. Sometimes they left messages on a note if they called when no one was there. The voice in the receiver sounded different, warmer. We learned to speak politely, to pass messages, to ask to be put on the phone. There were times when we waited for a call all day. and our hearts sank when it finally came. Phone conversations were real meetings, just without the stares, the laughter, the pauses, the breathing. Everything was audible. Sometimes we would just be quiet and listen to music together. Even a short call could make the day special. Postcards and letters were real bridges between people. They were written with pen on paper, carefully, thoughtfully. They picked up an envelope, put a stamp on it, went to the post office or put it in a yellow box. They waited for weeks for a reply, and this waiting only added value. The letters contained drawings, poems, the smell of perfume. Sometimes they were accompanied by photos, clippings, small souvenirs. Holiday cards came in stacks. Christmas, Thanksgiving, even just wishing her a good day. The paper held the warmth of hands, the handwriting almost like a voice. Some letters were reread several times. They were kept in boxes tied with ribbon, like treasures. Each envelope contained a piece of the soul. There were pen pals from other cities, even countries. This way of communication was slow, but very personal. It taught to wait, to listen, to answer thoughtfully. Letters didn't disappear in the feed. They stayed with you. The fashion of the 70s was so colorful that the streets seemed to come alive with shop windows. Flared pants were worn that fluttered freely with every step, as if everyone had their own win. Platforms added height and confidence, although they were sometimes difficult to walk on a gravel road. Shirts with wide collars, variegated scarves, herringbone ties, and suede vests were all in vogue. Colors, yellow, orange, emerald, as if the whole summer was transferred to the closet. Often sewed clothes themselves or sewed old ones, inspired by magazines. Jeans were necessarily worn flared or flared, with embroidery, rivets, or their own drawings with a marker. Many girls wore necklaces, headbands, and ring earrings. Boys had jackets with rivets, leather belts, and hairstyles, like Bowie or even Afro. Everyone tried to stand out, to create their own image. School discos were a parade of self-expression. In fashion was everything that distinguished you from your parents. Going to a clothing store turned into a real adventure, especially if you managed to find something really unusual. Back then, clothes were the language of a generation, and that language spoke loudly. Women wore dresses with bright, floral prints and huge glasses that covered half their faces. Hair was often styled in bulky coiffures that were difficult not to get tangled in. Fashionistas laced their handbags with long tassels, and flat-soled sandals, combined with long skirts, created a sense of freedom. With each passing year, fashion became more eccentric and confident. When new styles emerged, they instantly went viral, in the sense that everyone could find their own unique look, but couldn't escape the influence of what was around them. Speaking of men, one can't help but mention the legendary suits with narrow lapels and brightly colored checks. The so-called northern suits with broad shoulders and narrow pants were especially popular. Men often wore short-sleeved polo shirts that paid tribute to the sportswear era. All elements of clothing were harmoniously combined with jewelry, thick gold chains, rings, and bracelets. Men were not shy in their accessories. Wearing accessories was not only a sign of good taste, but also part of an image created from scratch. Experimentation with materials, textures, and bright hues became an integral part of everyday style. There were not only bright colors, but also different textures such as velvet and corduroy, which gave suits a special depth and luxury. Festivals and concerts were places where time seemed to stretch. Each concert felt like the event of the century, even if it was in the backyard of the local school. The music was loud, lively, touching you to the bone. Blankets were spread out in the meadows, fires were lit, thermoses were passed around, and people sang along in unison. Some people hitchhiked, others slept in the open air. Big festivals, like Woodstock or its echoes, were almost mythical. Rain, mud, guitars, the smell of grass and freedom. It was all associated with youth. Even local bands drew crowds. The main thing was the energy, the sincerity. Many people wrote the names of the concerts on the walls of their rooms. Posters, homemade t-shirts with band logos were sold. You could meet friends or fall in love in the crowd. Every night ended with music and a buzz in your ears. There were no phones, no one took pictures. Everything was just a memory. Every chord was alive, real. The concerts were the voice of a generation. The cars of the 70s were huge, heavy, and as beautiful as cruisers. My dad had a Chevrolet Impala with wide seats and a heavy door that had to be slammed shut with force. Inside, wood on the dash, the smell of leatherette and warm ashes. You could ride in these cars with 4 people in the front seat. The radio only picked up local stations, but it didn't matter. They still played the greatest hits. In summer, the windows were open wide, with your elbow on the frame and your hair fluttering in the wind. The back seat could hold rugs, a guitar, and a tent. There was the Mustang and the Camaro. Those who owned them were automatically heroes. The car was more than a means of transportation. It was freedom, personal territory. We often went on picnics, to lakes, and just drove around the city. In winter, we warmed up the engine with a blanket under the hood. We parked at open-air cinemas and watched movies right from the cabin. The cars were humming, roaring, full of life. They were true symbols of the 70s. Pictures on VHS tape recorders were a new marvel. Huge cassettes that were inserted into a VCR allowed you to watch movies at home, not just in the theater. The tape recorder hummed, buzzed, sometimes chewed the tape, and then you had to rewind it with a pencil. Collections of cassettes were stacked in shelves. Star Wars, Superman, some cartoons that were re-recorded 10 times. You'd see the time flashing in the corner of the screen, like a sign. It was all recorded by living hands. There were evenings when the whole family would gather in front of the TV and a VHS movie would come on, like a real event. Sometimes the tape would be interrupted in the middle of an important scene because the tape was not completely rewritten. TV programs with airings, with commercials, with missteps were recorded, and it was all stored. Rewound it back to watch the moment again. Sometimes we'd have a movie night with popcorn, plaid, and tapes. It could take minutes to rewind. And the sound when you turned it on was a muffled click, then the squeak of the tape. It was magic on magnetic tape. Disco and dance clubs were a separate world where everything shone, from the clothes to the ceiling. Floors glowed underfoot. Mirror balls threw light all over the room. People came to these places to be bright, loud, lively. Shiny shirts, sequins on eyelids, heels and wide belts were the norm. The music was powerful, with a beat that made it impossible to stand still. The Bee Gees, Donna Summer, KC, and the Sunshine Band. We danced till sweat, till morning, sometimes not stopping for hours. All the moves were recognizable. The wave of the arms, the sideways slide, the turns with the arm raised. Every Saturday morning there was discussion about who danced how and what was playing. Sometimes a DJ would show up with real vinyls nearby. Some had their own signature moves. Sometimes they would freeze, look each other in the eye, and the rhythm would do everything by itself. There were those who came just to listen. They sat against the walls and nodded to the beat. But even they couldn't resist staying alive. Couples met, broke up, fell in love right under the glowing ceiling. Disco was a breath of freedom, a dance without boundaries. It was an era that had its own soundtrack. Television commercials and jingles were imprinted in my memory like school rhymes. Simple tunes, sometimes silly, but so catchy that I started humming them without noticing. There were songs about cereal, about toys, about soda, and they came in between favorite shows. Sometimes the commercials were even more interesting than the show. Bright, fast, with funny characters. Many people had favorite commercials that were specially waited for. Some jingles were sung by the whole family. Kids loved the fun mascots, talking bears, singing bees, running hot dogs. Sometimes the commercials sparked arguments. Did you see that? And that was yesterday. We knew the voices of the announcers, recognized them even from half a word. The commercials showed dreams, happy families, clean kitchens, noisy parties. It seemed that everything in this world was gum, soda, and eternal summer. Slogans and phrases were memorized and repeated for years. Some commercials were recorded on videotapes. Advertising was part of the day, part of the culture, and some of the tunes are still playing in my head. In the 70s, advertising wasn't as intrusive as it is today, but it was an integral part of life. Jingles and commercial songs captured the imagination and filled the airwaves. "I'd Like to Buy the World a Coke" is one of the most iconic commercial songs of the time. Coca-Cola sold the idea of unity and fun like no other commercial. People sang this song at concerts, at schools, and of course at home. Everyone wanted to share this moment with the world, buy themselves a bottle of Coca-Cola, and feel a part of something bigger. Advertising in the 70s wasn't just advertising, it was a whole cultural phenomenon. Don't forget the iconic toy commercials, like Toys R Us, which featured the song, "I Don't Want to Grow Up, I'm a Toys R Us Kid." This jingle became synonymous with childhood. All children dreamed of going to the store, because it was the place where all children's wishes were fulfilled. Or, for example, the Lucky Charms commercial, where the cheerful voice of the announcer was a call to adventure. They're magically delicious. It was bright, full of imagination and magic, just like the packaging itself with these bright, colorful marshmallows. Milk breakfast boxes with slogans like that became almost as important as the breakfasts themselves. The slogans and tunes we heard in the 70s epitomized the optimism and childlike carefree spirit of that era. The theme of bright, catchy ads about drinks, toys, and candy was a kind of cultural code that created a special sense of unity and simplicity. Advertising then seemed to be a living part of everyday life, which you didn't need to go into to feel its joy. Waiting for TV programs was a real test of patience. If you missed it, and there was no way to rewatch it. We wrote down the times in notebooks, memorized them, asked our friends. Sometimes 2 programs overlapped, and we had to choose. Before the start, the room was silent. Everyone sat down comfortably so as not to miss a minute. If someone made a noise, they'd freeze, hissing, "Quiet!" There was only one TV set for the whole family, and there were arguments about what to watch. There were no remotes. We switched manually, getting up from the chair. There were favorite shows that were waited for weeks. Someone would turn on a tape recorder, just the sound to re-listen to later. There were screensavers that were recognizable from the first second. Signal interruptions were a tragedy. There were days when you waited all day for a show, and then suddenly, it wasn't on. Evenings with the TV were an important part of the ritual. It wasn't just a screen, it was a window to another world. Filming on motion picture film was done only on special occasions. The camera was big, heavy, with a huge lens and a reel inside. My father would put it on a tripod, put his finger on the button, and everything would freeze. We'd shoot birthdays, Christmas, a trip to grandma's. The films were then developed, brought home, put on the projector, and the room was filled with warm light. The wall turned into a screen, the faces of relatives flashed on it like shadows. Sometimes the tape would jam or spin too fast. No voices were recorded, just the rustle of the projector. But that made everything seem even warmer. Some of the movies were blemished, stained, and that made them all the more familiar. Children jumped, waved at the camera, ran past the lens. Adults laughed, waved, sometimes forgot they were being filmed. These recordings became part of family history, stored in hand-signed boxes. Revisiting each one was a trip back. When we turned on those old tapes, they always brought back some memory connected to that time, to those moments. Watching them was like reliving those happy moments again. Sometimes the laughter of children, the bright faces of parents or grandparents made my heart beat faster because they were no longer around. But here they were, on the screen, alive. Every detail became significant. How my mom cried at my first birthday party, how everyone laughed when I fell off the swing. It seemed that the film captured not only the external moment, but also the whole atmosphere of those days. Smells, sounds, feelings. Some moments became too precious to forget. Even if the movie was not perfect, with blurred frames, blotches, or missing shots, it was these imperfections that made these movies special. It was a testament to the fact that life, like film, is not always perfect. But that is the beauty of it. Friendship without the internet meant doorbells, not messages. To see each other, you just had to show up. And if your friend wasn't there, you had to wait or go looking around the neighborhood. We agreed at 4 by the store, and everyone came. Time flew by unnoticed. on benches, on swings, in yards. We talked about everything, shared, fought, made up. We wrote notes to each other in class, passed paper letters around the classroom. We had sleepovers with pajamas, board games, and talking until dawn. In the summer, we stayed together for weeks at a time, living at someone's cottage or just walking until dark. There were secret clubs, secret passages, vows. Friendship was closer, livelier, denser. No one was distracted by a screen. The whole world was here, close by. Everyone knew where their house was and the names of their brothers and sisters. Holidays were spent together, without photos and stories, but everything was imprinted in the memory. Sometimes friendships lasted a lifetime. It was real, not digital warmth. Retro toys were special because each had a story to tell. Rubik's Cube was a challenge. Hours of spinning, trying things out, sometimes erasing colors to assemble. Slinky went down the stairs, magical and a little hypnotic. Pet Rock was just a rock, but with eyes and a name, and that was enough to make it a friend. There were Viewmasters with round discs that showed slides like a little movie theater. Magnetic whiteboards that you drew on with a stylus and erased with a single strip. Hot Wheels cars launched from ramps that raced around the house. Barbie dolls with interchangeable outfits. Houses that were assembled from boxes. There were interactive toys that ran on batteries and made sounds. Board games, Monopoly, Battleship, Operation, brought the whole family together. Someone had a yellow plastic phone with eyes. Someone had a pony with a pink mane. Everything was stored in boxes under the bed or in chests. Some toys were passed down to the younger ones. Each one had its own energy, its own memories. It was a world without Wi-Fi, but full of magic. They were portals to imaginary worlds. A simple rubber frog could become the hero of a whole adventure, and a wooden constructor turned into a castle, a spaceport or a fortress. There were no instructions, no screens, just hands, imagination, and the warm light of the lamp above the table. Even broken toys lived on. Someone fixed them with duct tape. Someone invented a new role for them in the game. When adults talked peacefully in the kitchen, toys were the main companions in a world where everything was possible. Sometimes my memory clings to little things, the click of a tape recorder, the scent of vinyl, the dusty path in the backyard where bicycles would spin until dark. The 70s were not just a time, they were a feeling, warmth, freedom, leisureliness. Everything seemed closer then. People, music, dreams, and everything was lived not for later, but here and now, with real friends, real conversations, and real silence between songs. If this video brought back even a part of that feeling, subscribe to the channel. This is where you save what can't be reshot.